Take a seat, please. Good morning, members of the jury. Did you appreciate a little bit of extra time? You still got here pretty early. Anxiously awaiting to get in here, you know. Well, we took care of some matters in your absence, so it wasn't a waste of time in this end, and I think we're ready to proceed with the next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The state's next witness is Detective Desmond Summerall.
Detective, you raise your right hand if you sworn, please.
Solemn swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Yes, sir.
Good morning, Detective Summerall. Could you please state your name for the record?
Desmond Summerall,
And could you spell your first and last name for our court reporter, please?
DESMONDSUMEREL.
And you are employed by the Metro Nashville Police Department, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you explain what your assignment is?
My current assignment is I'm a general investigator at the South Precinct Investigations.
And how long have you been in that position?
I've been an investigator since 2016.
And prior to that, what was your position?
I've been with the police department for 26 years.
And can you explain how you became involved in the investigation into the homicide of Aquila De Silva, Torian Sonderland, Joe Perez, and D'Ebony Groves?
Yes, ma'am. In 2018, when this occurred, I was on the homicide investigator, one of the 3 homicide investigators out of South Precinct. On that morning, I was called at, I believe, 3:44 a.m. by my supervisor. I was advised that there had been a shooting, so I needed to come in. So I responded, and I arrived on scene, I believe, at 4:45, about an hour later.
And once you arrived on scene, what was the first thing that you did?
The first thing I did was meet with my supervisor and got briefed on basically what had happened. It was determined that I would be the lead detective on the case.
And as the lead detective, does that mean that you're the only detective for Metro Nashville Police Department assigned, or how does that work?
No, for homicides in South, we had 3 detectives that worked mainly homicides and death cases. So at that time, I would just be the lead, and the other 2 would assist me for the homicide investigation part of the case.
And the other 2, would that be Detective Clarer and Detective Jerry Baltimore?
Yes, ma'am.
And kind of those first moments at the scene, what's the first thing that you do?
The first thing I normally do when I got there was observe the crime scene. Of course, everything had been secured by that time. Forensics was already there, and they were already starting to process the crime scene. I didn't go into the Waffle House. I stayed on the outside of the Waffle House. I did observe the 2 victims who were outside the Waffle House in the parking lot. Spoke with some of the officers that had arrived first. All the witnesses their information had been taken. I was notified that 3 victims had been transported to Vanderbilt and 2 victims to Southern Hills Hospital.
And so you're not talking to any of the victims or witnesses or anyone that was inside the Waffle House at the scene? There
No, ma'am.
are other officers that are getting their information and getting kind of whatever the brief statements that they have at that moment are.
Correct.
Is that right?
Correct.
And at some point, do you view the surveillance video from the Waffle House?
Yes, ma'am.
And when does that happen?
That would be after I initially got to the scene and found out everything that happened. Myself and Detective Clare went to the Southern Hills Hospital first to speak with Mr. Shaw and Miss Shaw.
Okay.
After speaking to them, we came back, and that's when I was able to view the security video.
Okay, so when you speak to Miss Kayla Shaw, who's at Southern Hills Hospital, and Mr. James Shaw Jr. at Southern Hills Hospital, you haven't even seen the video,
No, ma'am, I haven't seen anything.
haven't been inside the Waffle House. You're just going to kind of get whatever brief information that they have.
Yes, ma'am.
And can you describe your interaction with Kayla Shaw when she was at the hospital, kind of what her demeanor was
It was real brief because she was in the treatment room, but I was able to speak with her. She was very distraught, very upset, and basically in a state of shock. Both of them were about what had just happened to them.
And you also spoke with James Shaw Jr., is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And was that a lengthy conversation?
It was very brief, just for him to give me a brief statement of what happened so I could get an idea of what actually happened inside.
And neither of those interviews were recorded, is that right?
I don't believe so, no, ma'am.
What was the next thing that you did?
Returned back to the scene. When I got back to the scene, I was advised that Mr. Da Silva had passed away at Vanderbilt. At that point, I believe the Waffle House manager showed up so he could take us into the side door, which is at the end of the Waffle House, into the office so we could view the video.
And why was it that he was needed to view the video?
I believe he's the only one that had access to it.
Okay, so it was something where prior to him arriving, you wouldn't have been able to
Right,
view
we couldn't
it.
get to it till the manager got there.
And were you able to view the video at that point?
Yes, ma'am.
And what's the next step in your investigation?
Oh.
And feel free to reference your supplement if needed. I guess after viewing the video, did you have any information related to the suspect?
After viewing the video, I was able to see the vehicle that he pulled up in, that it was still in the parking lot. We investigated the tags on the vehicle to see who the registered owner of the vehicle was. Was able to determine that it was registered to Mr. Ryan King. I was able to pull up a driver's license photo of Mr. Ryan King, and after comparing it to the video, I was able to fairly confidently determine it was the same person.
So the general description matched.
Yes, ma'am.
Which, and Detective Summerall, that video has previously been played during this trial. It's not a high definition, you can see every single thing that's happening type of video.
No, ma'am.
And did they explain to you why that was?
Well, not really. Just their quality of quality of video at that time wasn't really as good as it is now.
So, I mean, it kind of jumps.
It jumps and just doesn't record everything as smoothly as the ones we have now.
And were you able to immediately kind of search that vehicle, or what, if anything, had to be done at that point?
No, it was determined that due to the circumstances of the crime, we needed to have bomb squad come out and check the vehicle for any type of explosives.
And was that done?
Yes, ma'am.
And then what information did you have once the vehicle was searched?
The officer that searched the vehicle was able to tell us that while doing his search with his bomb dog and checking for devices, he saw 2 checks laying on the center console with Mr. Ryan King's name on them and an address, which was at 5000 Mountain Springs Road, which is right down the road.
So very close proximity to the Waffle House restaurant crime scene, is that
Yes, ma'am.
correct? And based off of that information, what, if anything, did you do?
At that point, I believe, let's see.
Did you go to the apartment itself?
Not at that point. We were still waiting on, the crime scene to be processed. It was decided that we would do a search warrant for the truck and the apartment the apartment itself of Mr. Ryan King. The 2 victims outside were identified as Mr. Saunderland and Mr. Perez, plus knowing that Mr. Da Silva had already passed away. After speaking with the supervisor, it was decided we had enough probable cause to obtain homicide warrants for Mr. Ryan King. So at that point, I left the scene and went and wrote up warrants and obtained warrants for Mr. Ryan King.
And that process of obtaining an arrest warrant, that's not something that you can just do remotely. You have to physically go get an arrest
Correct.
warrant
I had to come back to
signed.
the South Precinct, sit down, type out the warrants, then go downtown to the night court commissioner and present the evidence to him. to
And so
get a
you actually
warrant.
go in front of someone and swear
Yes, ma'am.
out the
Swear a
warrant.
warrant.
And at that point, once you had the arrest warrants, which you said initially it was just the 3 warrants, because that was the only information.
At that time,
you had
that was the
confirmed.
only victims had been identified. I didn't know I did not know Miss Grove's identity yet. She was still inside, and we weren't able to go inside yet to the Waffle House.
And that was just because of the crime scene processing process that they go through.
Yes, ma'am.
And so once the arrest warrants are obtained, did you obtain warrants to search the vehicle as well as the apartment?
Yes, Detective Baltimore took out or wrote those search warrants and got them signed. So by the time I did the homicide warrants, arrest warrants, and returned back to scene, he had the warrant signed. Our SWAT team went to the apartment and made entry to the apartment, cleared it, and then we went in to search the apartment for any evidence.
And were you there for that initial search?
Yes.
And was everything done the first time you walked in, or based on the circumstances of this case, did you go back to that apartment?
We did an initial search and went through, as everything was so chaotic, we held the scene all night long. An officer stayed at the apartment all night long to hold this house. And then we came back again the next morning, myself and my supervisor, my sergeant, Sergeant Thibodeau, and did another search to make sure we had not missed anything.
And I'm going to ask that this witness be handed a stack of photographs that have been pre-marked A through S. Detective Summerall, do you recognize the photographs that have just been handed to you?
Yes, ma'am. It's Mr. Ryan King's apartment.
And are those all photographs that were taken that first day when the scene was held?
Yes, ma'am.
Just clarification, S?
S. I believe they're 19.
Now, a couple of photos toward the end were taken the next morning when we returned.
But they were all taken during the time that the
correct.
scene was held.
Yes, ma'am.
So the initial photos were taken kind of initially, and then a couple of photos were taken
The next
when you
morning.
came back the next morning.
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask that those 19 photographs be introduced as the next numbered exhibit, which I believe would be 51A through S. And I have those available to digitally publish to the jury with permission of the court.
You may. I think our TV's working again.
Detective Summerall, Exhibit 51A is on the screen. Can you describe what is shown in this image?
This is like the living room area of his apartment. There's a table he's got set up as a computer desk with monitor and several different computers there.
And 51B.
I believe this is a hard drive. Oh no, this is a tablet.
Was that collected as evidence?
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm going to ask that this witness be handed an item. Detective Summerall, do you recognize that item?
It's a Samsung tablet that was recovered from the house.
And is that the same tablet that it is in the photograph of 51B?
Yes, ma'am, I believe so.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask that that be introduced as the next numbered exhibit, which would be 52.
All right, so then,
The next image is 51C. Could you describe what is shown there?
2 cell phones and some, I believe, some AirPods.
And is that 2 cell phones or a cell phone taken out of a case?
Well, it could be. It's hard to tell on that image. It is a cell phone. I believe the cell phone was taken out and the SIM card was removed.
And is that typical procedure when seizing a suspect's cell phone in criminal investigations to remove the SIM card?
Yes, ma'am.
And is that something that the technical services unit has directed detectives to do?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to ask that the witness be handed an item. Do you recognize the item that was just handed to you?
Yes, ma'am. It's an iPhone 6S.
And is that the cell phone that is shown in Exhibit 51C?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask that that be introduced as the next numbered exhibit.
53.
And Detective Summerall, this is 51D. Could you describe what is shown here?
They have a monitor. To the left on the floor, I believe, is a tower computer. Also on the desk is a Alienware laptop computer.
And were both of those items seized?
Yes, ma'am.
If the witness could be handed this item.
Yes, ma'am. It's the same laptop computer that's laying on the table there in the picture.
Your Honor, I'd ask that that item be entered as the next numbered exhibit.
54.
And this next image is 51E. Can you describe what is shown here?
It's a backpack, power supply. Some other items there, I'm not sure.
Does the power supply appear to be on an Apple brand?
Oh, yes, ma'am. It's
laptop?
on an Apple laptop, yes.
Otherwise known as a MacBook?
Yes.
Detective Summerall, I've just asked that an item be handed to you. If you can take a look at that when you receive it and let me know if you recognize it.
It's a MacBook laptop. Same as recovered there.
And Your Honor, I would ask that that item be introduced as the next number exhibit, which I believe is 55.
Okay. So we get it.
Which, Detective, were several of the other items, like the discs on the table and other things collected?
Yes, ma'am.
And the next image is 51F. Could you describe what is shown here?
It's a just a small home safe.
And what, if anything, was significant or located within that item?
Located in that small safe was a BMW key fob, which
And can you explain what your investigation revealed related to that key fob that made it relevant?
during the investigation, it's found that a BMW was taken from Brentwood, from a Brentwood dealership, stolen by Mr. Ryan King, and it had been recovered at the apartment at 5,000 Mountain Springs and towed from there, I believe, the previous day before the shooting.
And were you able to verify that that key fob in the safe matched the vehicle that had been stolen by Mr. Ryan King on the 17th?
Yes, ma'am.
Detective Summerall, I've asked that you be handed another item.
Man, this is a safe that was recovered from the 5,000 Mountain Springs.
And I would ask that item be introduced as the next numbered exhibit, which I believe is number 56. And Detective Summerall, could you describe what is shown here?
Several types of paperwork and a camera bag, tax documents.
And you are being handed another item.
Yeah, this is the bag that had 3 GoPro cameras with mounts with their memory cards in the camera bag.
And
holding
that
those
was
items.
all items that were located within this camera bag shown here on the countertop.
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask that that item be introduced as the next numbered exhibit.
57.
And Detective, there are various documents on the countertop, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm gonna ask that you be handed another item. And do you recognize that item?
This is a folder that contained several sheets of paper with passwords that was recovered from the house.
And the passwords are, how were you able to determine that they were passwords, I guess?
Through Chad Gish, I guess. I'm not sure. Officer
Okay.
Gish.
But opening it up and looking
Yeah.
at the documents,
It was apparent that they were passwords.
and were
used.
they related to accounts of Mr. Reinking?
As far as I know, yes, ma'am.
And did you collect that from the apartment?
Yes, ma'am.
And it's my understanding there's not a specific picture of it, but it was just found kind of within paperwork.
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, I'd ask that that be introduced as the next numbered exhibit.
Number 58.
It's not hard drive. Detective, I'm gonna back up to 51D. You've already testified that several of the other items from that area were collected. Do you recognize the item that was just handed to you?
It's a Western Digital hard drive, which
And
was.
was that also recovered from the apartment?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask that that item be introduced as the next numbered exhibit.
59.
And now we are at 51H. Can you describe what is shown here?
It's the bathroom for that apartment. You can see a magazine that fits an AR-15 type rifle on the countertop.
And the next image is 51I. Can you describe what is shown here?
And this is a rug in the same bathroom, which you could see blood smears on the rug in the bathroom.
And the next image is 51J. I believe you've already described this somewhat.
It's a magazine that fits an AR-15 type rifle.
I am going to ask that you be handed an item.
This is the magazine recovered from the apartment.
And that's the one that is shown in the photograph, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, at this time I'd ask that that be entered as the next numbered exhibit, which I believe is number 60.
It is and will be so.
Thank you. Detective Summerall, the next image is 51K. Can you describe what's shown in this image?
This is the bedroom of that apartment. Various clothes on the floor. No bed.
But there's a comforter and a blanket and a
Yes, ma'am. On the
pillow
left
and
side.
some
Yeah.
stuff. An alarm clock and a lamp. And 51L.
Just a pillow and bedding. Period where he'd been sleeping.
And 51M.
It's the closet of that bedroom.
And can you generally describe the items that were found in the closet?
There was several boxes of ammunition, 2 rifles, and some other writings.
And were the ammunition and the rifles collected as part of this investigation?
Yes, ma'am.
And this is 51N. Can you describe what is shown here?
There's a box of .22 ammo, some boxes of rifle ammo, other rifle caliber ammo, and some clothing.
And again, all of that ammunition was collected as part of this investigation, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And item is being handed to you.
This is, I believe 30.223 cartridges, which is the caliber that was used in the shooting.
And were those collected from that closet?
I believe so, yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, at this time, I would ask that those be introduced as the next numbered exhibit, which I believe is 61.
This is a box of 22 cartridges.
And you mean 22 caliber, correct?
22 caliber cartridges, yes, ma'am.
So it's several boxes.
Yes, several boxes, and yes, with 22 long rifle cartridges.
And those were collected from that closet area, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And Your Honor, at this time, I would ask that those be introduced as the next numbered exhibit. Thank you. Detective Summerall, you've been handed another item. If you can identify.
These are some boxes of 30-06 rifle cartridges, which is 30-06 caliber of the rifle.
Your Honor, at this time, I would ask that that item be introduced as the next numbered exhibit, which is 63. Do you recognize that item?
Yes, ma'am. It's a box of 45 caliber pistol cartridges.
And is it one box or potentially multiple boxes?
I believe it's one box.
Your Honor, at this time, I would ask that that item be introduced as the next numbered exhibit. And that last item that was just handed to you, Detective Summerall.
It's more just loose 22 caliber cartridges.
And again, collected from that closet area, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, if that could be introduced as the next numbered exhibit, which I believe is 65. Detective Summerall, I have now placed 51-0 on the screen. Can you describe what is shown there?
I believe it's two different rifles.
And at this time, I would ask that the witness be handed Exhibit 37. Do you recognize the item that was just handed to you?
This is a Remington 30-06, which was recovered from the closet apartment.
And was that collected as evidence in this case?
Yes, ma'am.
And This time I would ask that you open that item so that it can be published to the jury. And is that the item that you recovered from the closet?
Yes, ma'am.
And does that item have the scope on it?
It has a scope. It's a bolt-action rifle, 30-06 caliber.
And are you familiar with how a bolt-action rifle is fired?
Yes, ma'am. It's made to fire one shot at a time. You fire it, then you actuate the bolt, push it forward, pushing another round in the chamber before you can fire it again.
And at this time, I would ask that the item be returned to the box, and it was marked for ID previously, but I would now ask that it be introduced as Exhibit 37. And if the witness can be handed previously marked for identification only, Exhibit 39.
This is the other rifle that was taken from the closet.
And was that collected as evidence in this case?
Yes, ma'am.
And at this time, I would ask that that item be opened so that it can be published to the jury as well.
All right.
And Detective Summerall, is that the .22 rifle that was recovered from Mr. Ryan King's closet?
It is.
And are you familiar with that type of firearm as well?
It is also a bolt-action rifle with a scope on it. It fires the same way. You fire one shot, and you have to actuate the bolt before you can fire another round.
And if that item can be returned to the box, and I would ask that the previously marked 39 for ID only be introduced as Exhibit 39.
So marked.
Detective Summerall, there's an item over here in the right corner of this picture that is somewhat hard to see. Can you describe what that item is?
I believe it's a pistol case.
And was there anything of relevance for that pistol case to the investigation?
If I recall, I believe it was the pistol case that goes to the pistol that was recovered with him when he was located.
The Kimber .45 caliber firearm.
Yes, ma'am.
And if the witness can be handed one last item.
It's two rifle scopes.
And were those also located within that closet?
Yes, ma'am.
And those are obviously separate and apart from the scopes that are pictured and physically on the rifles.
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask that those two scopes be made the next numbered exhibit, which I believe is 66.
It is. So marked.
And Detective Summerall, this is now 51P. Could you describe what is shown here?
I believe the reason for this photo was the recovery of that cell phone pictured and two IDs of Mr. Ryan King.
And can you describe what else is shown in the image, just for the record?
Guitar case, I believe another backpack maybe. It's hard to tell, and some cables. One chair.
And this is 51Q. Can you describe what is shown here?
It's Illinois' driver's license and a crane operator certification card.
And was that LG cell phone also collected?
Yes, ma'am.
And the next image, which is 51R, can you describe what is shown here?
You have a safety vest, a hard hat, and some torn up paper, and a empty box of ammunition.
And image 51S, can you describe what is shown here?
This is the box of empty ammunition. It is a 200 round box of 45 grain jacketed hollow point bullets.
And those are 223 Remington, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. 45 grain jacketed hollow points. It's like empty box.
And was that collected?
Yes, ma'am.
And then the item that you have is that item that was collected, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, I would ask that that be introduced as the next numbered exhibit, which I believe is six.
Exhibit.
Thank you. Detective Summerall, after you searched the apartment, what is happening next in the investigation? I know you said you went there initially, you went back to do kind of a more thorough search and collect additional items. But in those first hours, there's already been testimony that Mr. Reinking was not located. So what are you doing with your part of the investigation?
After the initial search of the apartment, the search was still ongoing for him. So at that point, I went back to the South Precinct to start on paperwork, filling out offense reports, things of that matter.
And at some point, did you do anything? I know you said you went back to search the apartment. Did you do anything related to the vehicle of Mr. Reinking?
Yes, after searching the apartment the next morning, myself and Detective Baltimore did go to the towing lot where the truck had been taken and went through it again.
And did you collect any additional items from the vehicle?
Yes, we recovered, I believe, the checks, which had previously been seen during the bomb search, and also some receipts from the Nashville Armory.
I'm going to ask if the witness be handed an item. And Detective Summerall, just for the record, this item is actually opened. It's been opened by the parties in the case together,
Yes,
not
ma'am.
in any other fashion. If you could remove the items and identify whether or not you recognize it.
I'll try. Been stapled again. Have the vehicle registration of the vehicle, so the Chevy Silverado, 2 receipts from Nashville Armory.
And can you describe both of those receipts?
One receipt is a 4/8 of 2018. It's for a magazine, for a 30-round magazine, and also a Kimber, looks like a Kimber 45 magazine. 2 different magazines were purchased.
And what is the quantity on the Hex Mag 30-round FDE mag?
It's 30 rounds.
The quantity purchased?
Oh, 1. Oh, 3. I'm sorry. 3 were purchased of the Hex mags.
And the quantity for the Kimpro Tac Mag 8-round 1911 45 caliber ACP is?
1 was purchased.
Okay. And can you indicate the date and the specific time?
The date of this was 4/8/2018 at 3:55 p.m.
And the second receipt from the Nashville Armory that you located within Mr. Reinking's vehicle?
It is a return receipt of the Kimpro Tac 8-round 45 ACP magazine. And that was on 4/9/2018 at 12:10 p.m.
And only that Chem Pro Tac Mag 8-round 19 mag was returned.
Correct.
And what, if any, follow-up did you do once you located those receipts?
We were able to contact Nashville Armory and verify with them that Mr. Ryan King did purchase them, and also obtain some video showing him coming into the store and purchasing the items.
And so not only did they have his name in their system, but they actually provided surveillance videos, so you verified that it was him that entered and left.
Yes, ma'am.
And did they have any other transactions related to Mr. Ryan King, or was it just those two?
Just those to my knowledge.
And Your Honor, at this time, I would ask that the entire item be introduced as the next numbered exhibit.
68.
Detective Summerall, were you able to attend the autopsies of the deceased victims in this case?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you describe that?
Sorry. I did attend the autopsies of all 4 victims. First one, this was at 11 o'clock the next day. Mr. Sonderland had received 7 gunshot wounds, which one was a catastrophic wound to his head. Miss Groves had received 2 shots to the left side of her body, which one of the bullets traveled through her heart. Mr. De Silva received 2 gunshot wounds to his right shoulder and arm, and he was believed to have received internal damage and bleeding. And Mr. Perez had at least 4 gunshot wounds to the upper back, neck, and head area, and the wound to his head was a catastrophic wound.
And Detective Summerall, as a homicide detective, do you regularly attend autopsies of your deceased victims?
Yes, ma'am.
So that's something that's part of your daily activities.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there something particularly different about the autopsies of these victims?
I can just say this was the most victims I'd ever had at one time in an autopsy.
And once that part of the investigation is done, what's kind of the next thing that's happening in the investigation?
After that, I'd return back to the station, and it was decided I needed to go ahead and obtain an additional warrant for the murder of Miss Groves. And so I started to work on that, at which point I was notified that Mr. Ryan King had been apprehended.
And you obviously said that you're a detective at South Precinct. There's been previous testimony that Mr. Ryan King was briefly brought to South Precinct. Were you there and did you observe him?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you describe his demeanor?
He was calm, quiet, relatively normal to everything I saw. He was doing everything asked of him, complying with anything asked of him.
And after that, what, if anything, what was kind of the next step in the investigation?
My next step was just to, at that point he had been arrested, so start compiling all the information from all the different entities that had been involved, get information from FBI, ATF, bank records, just all the small stuff that had to be done after that.
Do you typically get FBI support in your homicide investigations?
Not normally, no.
And TBI, DA, ATF, is that?
It's normally all on me.
I guess the TBI probably assists more regularly than any other agency, and local DEA and ATF, but this was a lot of assistance.
Yes, ma'am.
So is it fair to say that there were a lot of interviews and things happening by other agencies that were being provided to you as part of your investigation?
Yes, ma'am.
And what information were you able to learn about Mr. Ryan King? I mean, he has an apartment here. Were you able to determine how long he had been at that apartment?
I believe it was a few months. I did get the apartment contract from the apartment complex, but I can't remember off the top of my head. how long he had been there.
Which you actually got a copy of his lease from the apartment complex?
Yes, ma'am.
Would it refresh your recollection to review that document?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, this showed he had started his lease in January, end of January 2018.
And how much was that, the rent on that apartment?
$920 per month.
And it has Mr. Ranking's signature on it, is that correct? For his information.
It has his information on here, doesn't have his signature.
Were you able to determine, I mean, I guess at this point in the investigation, you're trying to figure out who this person is and I guess why this might have happened.
Yes, ma'am.
Were you able to locate any friends of Mr. Ranking?
The very first day that it happened, while I was back at the station trying to start my paperwork, I'd received a call from a former friend of Mr. Ryan King's. I'll give you his name. Mr. Syndrome called and wanted to speak with a detective.
And did he indicate that he had had recent contact with Mr. Ranking?
I believe he indicated to me that it had been about 4 years since he'd spoke with him.
Were you able to locate, you yourself able to locate any friends that had regular contact with Mr. Ranking?
No, ma'am.
And what about any employment? Were you able to determine whether or not he had a job?
I believe I did contact the company from the check he had received, and he was employed as a crane operator in Nashville for a short period.
And are you a crane operator? Do you know what that means?
Yes, ma'am.
And I guess, can you explain how you know what that means?
Back in 1989, I joined the National Guard, and I was trained as a crane operator in the National Guard back in 1989 for a short period.
So you have actually operated a crane.
Small cranes, yes, ma'am.
And can you describe, is that a difficult task or an easy task?
It can be a very difficult task, something you have to be on your game all the time. You can't be daydreaming. You have to concentrate. There's so much that goes into it. You have to know how much load you're lifting. You got to be aware of the people around you, what they're doing, what the load you're moving is doing. So many factors of the boom angle, how far you can lift it, how much you can lift, how much it's going to cause the crane to tip over. A lot of it goes into a crane operator.
So that sounds like math, physics, somewhat engineering.
A lot, yes, ma'am.
Complex. And you said that you were able to locate that he had recently worked as a crane operator in the Nashville area.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you, I guess at that point, did you have any victim or witness that was at the scene? I know you have his vehicle, you found his apartment, you have a lot of information, but did you have any eyewitness identification at that point?
I did. The day after, or the third day after, I went to the Vanderbilt Hospital and spoke with Miss Wagner and Miss Henderson.
And Miss Wagner, Shantia, when you went to the hospital, what was her condition?
She was aware, but she was very distraught. Still, she had been through a couple of surgeries, I believe, already, and had to go through several more that were in the future.
And was she able to provide any information related to his identity?
No, she was not. She described to me what happened, but she could not identify Mr. Ryan.
And what about Miss Henderson?
I interviewed Miss Henderson. She was kind of in the same situation. She had been through some surgeries and had more to go through, but she was aware and spoke to me and described what happened to me. And I had asked her, did she think she could identify the suspect? and she indicated to me that she could.
And so what did you do at that point?
At that point, I went back to the precinct, made a photo lineup up, and went back to the hospital, presented it to her, and she picked Mr. Ryan King out as being the person that shot her.
And was she certain about that identification?
She said 100%.
And I'm going to ask that you be handed a folder that has a 4-page document. Do you recognize the document that was just handed to you?
Yes, ma'am. This is the photo lineup that was presented to Miss Henderson.
And is her signature on that photo lineup?
I've got it marked that she was unable to sign due to her injuries.
And she was right-handed, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, at this time, I would ask that the four-document photo lineup within the folder be entered as the next numbered exhibit, which I believe is 69.
No.
If I could have one moment. I mean, I can put it there. Detective Summerall, I just want to clear up a small detail. The lease contract that I handed to you earlier is dated January 2018, is I believe what your testimony was. It's specifically January 31st, 2018, with the lease term beginning February 3rd of 2018.
Yes, ma'am.
And then it says through midnight, February 2nd, 2019.
Yes, ma'am.
And that is that apartment at 409.
That's correct.
Technically, they have a typo on their lease because it says 500 Mountain Springs Road, but we all know it's 5,000.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so Miss Henderson was able to make a positive ID.
Yes, ma'am.
Were there various other steps that were taken of evidence processing, of DNA testing and ballistics testing and things of that nature?
Yes, ma'am.
And at some point, did you follow up and try to speak with every person that was in the Waffle House at the time that this happened?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you ask the people to come in and do interviews?
I ended up mostly going out and finding most of the people and going to where they were to interview them.
But did you interview a few of the people at the station?
Yes, ma'am.
And I know that some of the people were not as local as everyone.
Yes, ma'am.
Those interviews, were they lengthy interviews, or was it more just to kind of document the information that they had from that 1 minute of
Just
the
brief,
incident?
going over exactly what happened to them, what they saw, real short, nothing lengthy.
And did you follow up in any way related to financial records of Mr. Ryan King?
Yes, I believe I did a subpoena, and also the ATF, I believe, provided me some bank records.
And those, did you review those as part of your investigation?
Yes, ma'am.
If I can have just one moment. Detective Summerall, do you see Travis Ryan King in the courtroom?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you point him out and identify what he's wearing?
He's a gentleman here with a white long sleeve shirt on, the defense table.
Thank you, Detective Summerall. I don't have any other questions.
Ross?
Thank you, Ron. Good morning, Detective Summerall.
Yes, sir.
My name's Luke Evans. I'm one of the attorneys for Mr. Reinke.
Yes, sir.
So, if I understood your testimony, you're the lead detective or lead case agent on this investigation, correct?
Yes, sir.
So, according to your responsibilities in that role, it was important that you knew everything there was to know about the investigation of this case. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
I mean, obviously you had to rely on the help of others, no doubt.
Yes, sir.
But it was incumbent upon you to review the information and be reported back to with information that was progressing throughout the investigation, correct?
To the best of my ability, yes, sir.
Now, and as part of your responsibilities as a detective, you keep what they call an investigative supplement report to kind of keep your thoughts in order. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
That also serves to help you document what information you glean at what time in an investigation. Is that
Yes, sir.
right? So, if I understood you correctly, you said that after, I think, getting the information from the truck that had the address, the apartment address on it, is when you actually got the warrant for the apartment, went to Mr. Ryan King's apartment to search. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, you searched it, I think, a couple of different times. Is that fair?
Yes, sir.
All right. And when you're searching it, the first time, is that when those pictures were taken that you identified? I guess Exhibit 51A through S, those particular photographs?
The majority of them, I believe I pointed out that 2 of them were taken the next day.
Okay. And the point of you going into Mr. Ryan King's apartment at that time is to document pretty much everything you see there, correct?
Yes, sir.
And fair to say you walked in and pretty sparse.
Yes, sir.
No bed.
Nope.
All right. I think you pointed out to one of the pictures and noted that he appeared to be sleeping on the floor with a blanket over in the corner.
Yes, sir.
Kind of a folding table for a desk, correct?
Yes, sir.
And just so I didn't miss it, I never saw like a couch or anything of that nature in the apartment.
I believe there was a chair. There was no couch, nothing like
And
that.
that chair you're talking about, was that little kind of foldable black chair that was over by one of the, I think probably the balcony door to the apartment?
Yeah, there's a folding chair and also the computer desk chair, whatever you want to call that.
But that's it, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, when we're looking at that, and could I retrieve Exhibit 51, please? And I'll need the Elmo. With the document presenter.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm going to let you see 51D, previously ended by state. Okay. Fair to say there was quite a bit of computer equipment.
Yes, sir.
I think you noted 2 separate laptop computers, correct?
I believe it was a laptop, a tablet, the tower computer,
A tower, and then there was a MacBook.
and a MacBook. Yes, sir.
When there was also, is there a microphone on the desk there?
I'm not sure.
You
I
see
believe
that?
it. Yes, sir.
That looked like a microphone just to the right of the lamp.
Could be. Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, as part of your investigation, you took all that information, not the information, but those computers, all the electronic devices, and you had, I think you noted in your report, you sent those to another division that forensically evaluates those things, examines
Yes,
them,
sir.
looks at them, right?
Correct.
So they can report back to you and say, here's everything that was on all of those digital devices.
Yes, sir.
And you've reviewed those digital devices as part of your investigation?
I did not review all that stuff. No, sir.
Have you reviewed any of that stuff?
I think I may have saw only one video from that stuff.
What kind
I
of
didn't
video?
go back and look at it. Mr. Ryan King was sitting at the desk watching a movie.
Okay.
Videotaped himself watching a movie is the one I looked at.
Okay. And so, but you're saying that's the only video.
Yes, sir.
You have an approximation of how many gigabytes or terabytes or however of digital information was retrieved and forensically looked at by your department?
I have no idea.
Fair to say, a lot,
A lot.
right?
Yes.
And based on the information you've gleaned, there was a significant amount of videos of Mr. Reinking kind of vlogging talking into a camera.
I never saw that. I never
I'm
watched
not
any
asking
of that.
whether you looked at them or not. Are you aware that those types of videos existed on those machines?
I know there was a lot of information on it. I couldn't tell you exactly what was on there.
Okay. GoPro camera, I think you said that was Exhibit 57. You recovered
It was
that?
recovered, yes.
Right. And a GoPro camera, just obviously, I would imagine the jury knows what a GoPro is, but is that a camera someone can use to?
Like a video camera, to my best of my knowledge. I don't have one, but yeah, used as a video camera to record something.
Okay. Either themselves or others, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And in that camera case that was part of Exhibit 57, you said there was memory cards in there as well?
Yes, sir.
And did you review those memory cards?
I did not.
Is that something that you passed on to your forensic team to have them look at? Or?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then Exhibit 59, just to be clear, was a Western Digital hard drive.
Yes, sir.
And that was something else that was turned over to your computer forensic team, correct?
Yes, sir.
So it was your job during this investigation to learn as much about Mr. Reinking as you possibly could. Is that correct?
My job as a homicide detective was to determine who did the crime and if I could get enough evidence to charge him with the crime. That was my initial responsibility. This being probably in that respect, one of the easiest homicides I'd ever had. The weapon was on the scene, the suspect's vehicle was on the scene, and I had video. I don't ever get that in homicide.
Right. So obviously you had the video.
And witnesses.
But you had to take steps to find out who Travis Reinking was, correct?
Well, I mean, I had to figure out who he was to identify him as a suspect, yes.
Sure, like where he was from, right?
Yes.
And during your investigation, you actually were able to locate a Morton, Illinois address for Mr. Reinking. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And as part of that, you were also able to find that where he lived and had lived in Morton, Illinois was part of the Tazewell County Sheriff's Department's jurisdiction, correct?
Yes, sir.
You were asked a little bit about other agencies that had been involved with the investigation for the shooting at the Waffle House.
Yes, sir.
And you, I think, rattled off, there were several
Yes, sir.
federal agencies and otherwise.
Yes, sir.
One of them that I don't know that got mentioned, but the Secret Service was actually contacted, loosely involved in this investigation, correct?
I never had any contact with the Secret Service, so I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, at some point, you did find out as part of your investigation on how to move forward, determining how to proceed, that Mr. Reinking had been involved in an incident at the White House in Washington, D.C. in August of 2017, correct?
Objection. No reapproach.
You may.
So again, I'll restate the question. You were made aware that Mr. Reinking had been involved in an incident at the White House in approximately, what was it, August of 2017, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, you were going through his apartment and searching it, and it's fair to say, I think you noted it here, you say you located 2 rifles and ammo,
Yes, sir.
correct? A cell phone,
I believe there's multiple cell phones, I think, in the apartment.
and then you say some writings of the suspect.
Yes, sir.
And where were those writings of the suspect?
I believe there were some notebooks found in the closet.
Okay. And a GoPro camera,
Yes, sir.
2 laptops, correct?
Yes, sir.
A tower computer,
Yes, sir.
and we already mentioned the tablet.
Yes, sir.
Now, you also mentioned going back a second time
That's
to the
correct.
apartment. And during that incident, you were able to locate an additional notebook, you say, with the suspect's writing in it. Correct?
If that's what I wrote, yes.
And then you found a letter that had been ripped up that you guys reconstructed, right?
Yes, sir.
And that was a letter that, from reconstruction, you could tell that Mr. Reinking had written to Taylor Swift.
I believe so.
Now, I want to go back to this safe. And if you could, the clerk could, pass the witness Exhibit 56.
Yes, sir.
Can you open it for me?
I will.
And if you don't mind, with the court's permission, can he stand up and walk in front of the jury and let them take a look at that?
You need to put that podium out there so we can. Are you gonna want him to open it or anything, or just?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yeah, put the podium out there so we can set it down there.
Now, Investigator Summerall, before you open it, when you were on scene and you opened that safe, I think you described earlier there was a BMW key fob.
I believe so, yes.
But that's not all that was in that safe, correct?
I don't recall.
You know, you recall the key fob, but you don't remember that there was anything else, or whether there was anything else in that
Key
safe.
fob was pertinent to it. I knew it involved the BMW that had been taken from there, so I knew that was more. But I can't recall anything else was in the safe.
So you're saying, from your recollection right now, you can't remember whether or not you opened up that safe and the single solitary thing in that safe was a key fob, or if there was any other item, whether you remember the item or not?
I can't, no, sir, I don't recall what else was in there besides the key fob.
Well, let's find out. So can you hold that up for the jury? Yes, you did. Did you open it?
I don't recall.
You don't recall if you opened it?
No, sir. It's been over 4 years ago. I don't recall.
But you remember the key fob so well.
Yes, sir. It was turned in his property.
Let me ask you this.
Verify that it was a key fob. Yes, sir.
Where was, so you see how it is now. Was the key fob on top of that information? Was it below it? Did you have to dig in it? How'd you
Right
find it?
here.
Is that how it was when you saw it?
Yes, sir. As far as I recall, I can't remember. I just know it was in the safe.
So, we got the key fob. What's under the key fob?
Looks like a letter.
Who's the letter to?
Well, there's a letter to Oprah Winfrey, and a letter, top of this page it says, Dear Taylor. I don't know who Taylor, which Taylor he's talking about.
All right. Read it.
Just for a moment, is he gonna, are you wanting the jury to see any more that's in there, or?
Yes, sir.
Because I'm just hoping he's being picked up properly on his testimony, because he's hard to hear from. Of course, he's facing you, but I'm not hearing him very well.
Well, and I think it would be, I'll tell you what we'll do. Pick the items up. So let's do this, if you don't mind. And what I'll do, Your Honor, with your Honor's permission, I'm going to have him kind of display the items and then go back to the podium, and then we can work through what the content says.
Could you, if you could remove the key fob, you showed that to the jury.
key fob,
And what's the next thing?
a letter, marked Oprah Winfrey.
Okay.
Some handwriting, different sheets of paper with writing on it. Looks like a lease from 2016, 2017. Passport. Some medical records, medical letter. Title of a vehicle, a Yamaha, looks like a motorcycle. Pictures. Another piece of mail. Another medical, something from Blue Cross Blue Shield. 3 more pictures. Some kind of documentation of a car deal, I believe. BMW tag, a 2018 BMW XR6. Another bill. Social Security Administration letter. Secretary of State of Springfield, Illinois. Looks like to be another title to a vehicle. Birth certificate. Two notebooks, bank book, checkbook, another passport, and a diploma. That's all.
All right. And if you can put the contents back in and then return to the witness stand, and we'll kind of go through a few of those items. Thank you.
Jury, we need to address a particular issue that's taking a little longer than I thought, so if you can, please just step back to the jury deliberation room and, relax for a few minutes. We'll get you back in here as quickly as possible. Please, again, keep in mind, you cannot discuss anything about what's taking place in this courtroom. Keep your thoughts to yourself, remain open minded.
Ladies and gentlemen, with the chair and follow me through.
Be seated, please. Which two letters, there's two letters that you're wanting to read to the jury, or what?
So, there's two letters that I intended to address with this witness. But I want to make clear, it's our position, that safe is evidence. It's in. So this whole thing about he can't read it, that shouldn't be read, this is not authentic, that's hearsay or a statement of the defendant, they should have thought of that before they put it in. It's in. So with this witness, I intended to ask about a couple of the letters and some more questions about the notebooks, but not necessarily having them read them. But it's our position that everything in that safe is in evidence now, can be referred to in the presence of the jury. The jury has a right to know what's in it and could look at it in deliberations. They could open it and go through every piece of it.
And the state has no objection to that. The state put the safe in evidence with its content. They can absolutely review it. This witness's testimony is that he did not go through everything in that safe. He is not familiar with the contents of the safe. He doesn't know anything about the context or where they came from. Asking this witness questions about those letters when he said, I don't even remember what was in this, I don't know anything about this, that's not appropriate. If the jury wants to go through it in deliberations, it is an item in evidence. The state's objection is asking this witness to read out something that he knows absolutely nothing about.
But you're saying that it's all right for the jury to do that, even though they don't know anything about it.
It's an item in evidence. If they want to review it during deliberations, I don't see how the state can.
Let me
stop
see the
them.
two letters first of all.
And again,
What specifically, which letters or whatever they are documents are you referencing that you want to address specifically in front of the jury?
Well, for the record, I want to address everything in that, potentially everything in that safe in front of the jury, whether it be now or in argument. But for this witness, what I had intended was there's a letter in an envelope that says, it's addressed to Oprah Winfrey, and then there's a letter that says, Dear Taylor. It's right on top. He actually referenced both. All right.
You can pull them both.
This is just a stack of letters. That's what's on top.
Is that what you're talking about, this stack?
Yep. Those two things in the court deputy's hands.
and again, Your Honor, as I stated at bench conference, the letter to Oprah was sealed until last week when it was opened at defense counsel's request in our presence. It was not an item that would have been open.
And are you intending to have him read each and every one of these? I mean, there's a lot of stuff in here that's in addition to possible letters to Taylor Swift. The one on top is it says Dear Taylor, I'm assuming you're Swift.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, but then there's something to an Allison.
And again, my intention was not to have the detective read everything in that entire stack, and I would have to actually look through the stack very briefly to pinpoint exactly what I would have the detective read.
All right, well, I'm gonna overrule the objection, it has been made an exhibit, of course, the statement clarified, you know, this, he doesn't really have any personal knowledge of what the content is based on his testimony already, but apparently it was discovered in the safe, during good what weight they wanted to, whether or not it was written by him or, since it is an exhibit, I will allow you to get into whatever it is you intend to get into.
Yes, sir.
And there's a whole lot of stuff there beyond just letters to Oprah and Taylor.
And if Your Honor, can I retrieve the two documents that you just looked at very briefly, and I can, that way I can more accurately direct him to where I want him to read.
Okay. Are we gonna need to make copies of this so everybody
Judge,
can?
copies were made of all those documents and provided to defense counsel when we went through the evidence. We met with them, we went through everything, they requested copies of those items, we provided those to them.
Do you have your copies of work that you may have worked on?
That'd be more, actually.
I'm not asking for a copy right now, I'm just saying that I wanna make sure I'm looking exactly at the letter I want him to read, or items I want him to read. So I can make sure my order is exactly the order, because we do have working copies.
Okay, well, while he's doing that, why don't we take about a 10-minute recess and let it get organized?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay?